Hi everyone, and thanks for watching. I'm Lauren from Guthrie and Ganny, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you my hints and tips for making the Sew Liberated Bedrock Tee. So some of you will be watching this video as you got access to it as part of a kit to make a really lovely version, or it might be that you got access to the video as a separate thing. Either way, the video doesn't totally replace the instructions. I would recommend watching the video alongside reading the instructions, either if you've chosen to print them out or on your device or laptop, and seeing some of the steps up close will hopefully help to give a little bit of extra context and help you get a really lovely finish on your garment. I am also going to generally talk about sewing with jersey stretchy fabrics as well, so you're going to pick up loads of hints and tips that will be super useful for any other future projects that you might choose to make with this fabric. Such a versatile fabric, obviously very comfortable to wear, and once your dressmaking repertoire opens up into be able to work with these types of fabrics, it really is an exciting time because there's so many different things that you can do with these types of fabric. So if you did get the kit from us, then inside there you will find your A0 pattern printout for all the versions of the pattern. It does come with lots of different versions, this one, which is very good, and you do also get access to the PDF files as part of this kit as well, so check out your order confirmation email or in the files and videos section online so you can access that if you need to. The instruction booklet will also be there as well. Then you've also got a little me-made woven label that you can choose to put in the back of your project. Then you've also got some stretch fix as well, which will look a little bit like a bit of paper, so don't chuck it out. This is really useful, and I'm going to explain how to use it when you come to do the hems on your t-shirt, so the bottom hem and the sleeve hem as well, if you're not doing one of the versions that has a little band on it. So yeah, I'll go into more details of that later, but for now just make sure you don't chuck out the thing that looks a bit like a bit of paper. And then you've also got some thread. So we have just included standard regular polyester sew all thread in this project, which you can use in your regular sewing machine to complete this project. The other option for sewing with stretchy jersey fabric and thread is to get Mariflex thread. That's the Gutermann version of it. You can get other branded stretchy threads as well. And the difference between a Mariflex thread and a regular thread is that the Mariflex thread actually stretches. So it means that when you come to make the stitches on your sewing machine, you can use a regular straight stitch because the thread is stretchy. But what we're going to do with the regular polyester thread is I'm going to talk through a few different options of sewing a stretchy stitch on your sewing machine. So you'll be in good stead for the future to be able to know how to use any type of thread when you're working with this type of fabric. And then you have also got your pack of machine needles as well. So these are jersey needles. They also get known as ballpoint needles too. And the idea behind these needles is that the very tip of the needle is ballpoint. It's not as sharp as a regular standard needle. So it means that when the stitches get formed through the fabric as you're sewing it, the needle almost like pushes through the fibres of the fabric rather than stabbing or piercing them, and it is so that the chances of a little hole forming or any weakening of the seam is minimised and reduced. So if you are working with this type of fabric, it's really good to switch out the needle that is in your machine. So I used a size 80 for the weight of fabric that we had in the kit, which is just like a regular t-shirt weight. If you are using in the future any other type of sort of lighter, very fine stretchy fabric, maybe that's viscose or tencel, you might want to go to a 70, or if you're using something that's a bit sort of thicker and bulkier like a sweatshirting or maybe a thicker French terry, then you can go up to a size 90, but generally speaking a size 80 will cover most things. And then onto the specific fabric that we included in the kit. And this is a really beautiful fabric. It's perfect for summer, and it is a cotton and linen mix. So it has 70% cotton, it's got 25% linen and then 5% elastane. And the fact that it's got linen in it gives it a really nice sort of depth and character to it. So when you look closely at the fabric, you'll almost see like little kind of flecks or like a marled effect. It gives a little bit of added texture to the fabric, and it's just really lovely and nice, very cool and breathable to wear in the summertime. Now, generally when we talk about jersey fabrics, they are knitted rather than being woven, and they typically get knitted on machines that are like big tubes. So they make a big tube of fabric rather than a flat bit of fabric, which is what typically when fabrics are woven on a loom, they would be flat. So in order to get this tube of fabric flat when it is knitted, is that it has to be cut, and then that's when you get your bit of fabric. Either you maybe get it from a roll or a bolt in a fabric shop. That's how it becomes like a flat bit of fabric. So where it's been cut, that then effectively becomes the selvage, but it's not really the same as the selvage that's in a woven fabric, because the selvage in a woven fabric gets made as the fabric is getting woven. The selvage on a jersey or stretchy fabric gets made when the tube of fabric gets cut. And sometimes what fabric manufacturers will do is put, it's not a glue, it's almost like a fabric hardening substance on that cut edge just to stabilize it a little bit, and it then makes it easier to process, put it onto rolls, put it onto bolts, etc. So that's typically what you'll see at the sort of selvage side of jersey fabric. Sometimes it can come off in the wash a little bit. You're not really using that little side bit of the fabric anyway, so it doesn't get in the way of creating your garment at all. But because it's almost like a sort of fake selvage, we don't use that selvage when we're lining up our pattern pieces. So I'm going to talk in detail about how to get the grain of your jersey fabric and make sure that you cut your pattern pieces out nice and straight so that they don't twist and warp as you wash and wear the garment later. Now, when we talk about what jersey fabrics are made, they can be made from loads of different fabrics. So as I said, the specific one that's in the kit is a cotton and linen mix, but they might be made from viscose or tencel or polyester, or a combination of different fibres as well. And they typically have some sort of stretchy fibre in them as well, but not always. So elastane or spandex, as the sort of branded one is, and that will typically range from sort of 2 to 5%. So obviously the more spandex that it has typically means that it's more stretchy, but that is different from the physical percentage stretch that is in the fabric. So quite often with sewing patterns, you will see that the recommended fabric for that pattern needs to have a certain percentage of stretch, and this is different from the fibre percentage, the fibre content percentage. So the percentage of stretch, the sort of meaning behind that is physically how much is the fabric stretching. And that can be affected by the fibre content. It can also just be affected generally by the way that the fabric's been knitted as well. And the way to calculate that is by measuring a 10 centimetre section and then see how far it will comfortably stretch to. So not pulling as hard as you possibly can, just gently. So you can see here our fabric has a 45% stretch. So it's something you can quite easily test on a bit of fabric that you've got. If you're shopping for fabric online on our website at Guthrie & Ganny, we always work that out when we get new fabrics in, we put that on the listing. So it means you can always check out what that physical percentage stretch is as you're buying your fabric. Sewing patterns will typically specify a percentage of stretch that the garment is being designed to have. So for the Bedrock Tee, it says that the fabric you use needs to have a 40% stretch. So you could use fabric that has more than that. So you could use a fabric that has, well, this one has 45 or 50, you know, it could be one that's 50 or 60. If you use a fabric that has less stretch in it, then what it will mean is that if you're making, especially one of the more fitted views of this pattern, it will basically mean that it comes up too small. That's what's going to happen. So I guess some people would maybe get around that by sizing up, but obviously it becomes a bit more subjective of knowing what your finished garment is going to come out like. So that's why it's good to try and match the fabric that you've got to the percentage of stretch recommended in the pattern, because that's what the pattern has been drafted for. Now, for the fabric in the kit, I would recommend that you do pre-wash it. And for this one, we found that if you tumble dry it, it does shrink a bit more. It's very typical for jersey fabric to shrink, so always bear that in mind when you're purchasing your fabric. Always get a little bit extra. It can vary between 5 and 10% shrinkage. on jersey fabric. And yeah, just the heat and the process it goes through in the tumble dryer can shrink jersey fabric even more. So what I would suggest you do for the fabric we've got given you in the kit is wash it at 30 or 40 or whatever your sort of regular washing cycle laundry situation is that you're going to be then washing the t-shirt with afterwards, and then try and dry it as flat as possible, and this prevents the fabric from stretching out as it dries. So I have an air dryer, a sort of clothes dryer that can open out quite flat, and I tend to fold the fabric up so that there's not any sort of drag or pull on it as it's drying. So I have to sort of rotate it around a little bit, and then yeah, you want it to dry as flat as possible. If you hang it up in a line, the weight of the fabric as it dries is going to just stretch and distort, which means that then when you cut your pattern pieces out, they'll be stretched and distorted, which means that your final garment will then be stretched and distorted. So getting that right all comes from the drying process in the first place. When it comes to choosing a size and variation with this pattern, you have got so many different choices. It's such a great pattern for versatility, and really you can get lots of different looks. So I hope that it will become a wardrobe staple pattern for you. So we made View A, which is the tank top, and that was in the blue colourway here. So you can see it's got the little bands at the neckline and the arm openings. And then we've got the View A short sleeve, which is the sort of minty colour here. Then we've got View A with a half sleeve in the mauve colour. And then a sleeveless View B, which is the pink one, and then the short sleeve View B, which is the one that I'm wearing here just now. And you can see that the fit in the body of these different views is different as well. So you can have one that's a bit looser, like this one's a bit looser here, or View A is a bit more fitted, and then you've got different hem lengths as well. So with View B, it's more of like a dipped hem, whereas View A is more like a straighter hem. So you can really kind of combine these different options to get a t-shirt that you know really fits your preferences. So the samples that we did make are all just to my measurements. I feel like the sizing comes up really good and accurate when you pick a size based on your measurements. So as it's a summer kit, we didn't make any of the full length sleeve options as one of the samples. We made that half sleeve one as well, but if you were to make the longer sleeve, it's worth bearing in mind that for View B, the long sleeve is a bit wider, whereas for View E, it's View A, sorry, is a bit more fitted. Now, if you've only made woven garments before, when you do come to look at the finished garment measurement chart in this pattern, you might be a little bit surprised to see that the difference between the body measurements and the garment finished measurements are just a bit different. And this is because of the type of ease that is designed in stretchy or jersey garments. So when we talk about ease, that is referring to the difference between your actual body and the garment that you make. So for woven fabrics, the garment that you make needs to have positive ease. It needs to be bigger than your actual body so that you can move, so that you can take it on and off. Whereas with stretchy jersey fabrics, because the fabric itself moves, you can have either no ease or you can have negative ease, which is where the garment that you make is smaller than your actual body, and that's where the fit comes into it. So on View A, there is no ease at the bust, and on View B, there's just half an inch of positive ease there, although you can see there is quite a bit of ease through the waist as well. So just bear that in mind when you're picking a size as well, and it can also be a way that you can customise the fit of the garment that you make too. Like if you just generally prefer things looser and the garment you're making has a lot of negative ease, you could size up by one size, and then it would just have a little bit more ease in it for your body. Now, when it comes to cutting out, you'll need to get all of your pattern pieces ready, and there are a lot of pattern pieces in this sewing pattern because there's lots of different versions. So you just need to make sure that you have got all of the correct bits for the version that you want to make, and obviously keep all the others in case you want to make any other versions. So for View B, which is the one I'm wearing just now, the hem is higher at the front than it is at the back. And our experience from using this pattern in some of our in-person workshops here at Guthrie and Ganny is quite often people like to lengthen it a little bit, and there's two ways that you can do that. So you can either have it longer overall, so lengthening it in the front and the back, and you would do that with the shortened lengthened lines that are on the pattern. So you would just be cutting the pattern and then inserting a scrap of paper that was however long you wanted to lengthen it by, an inch or a couple of inches, and you can see what the finished garment length measurements are in the pattern instructions as well, and that's measuring from your shoulder down to the finished hem length. Now if you wanted to just lengthen the front of that high-low hem, then it's really easy to do that. I'll show you how. So you need to put a scrap of paper under the bottom of the front piece and tape it in place, and then just extend the centre front fold line and mark the length that you want to add, whether that's an inch, 3/4 of an inch, whatever, and just draw a line at 90 degrees to this so that you don't get a sharp point at the front, and then just smoothly blend it back into the seam allowance at the side seam. And again, I'm doing this by hand, but you could use a curved ruler here if you find that easier. Now if you want to make the half sleeve like I did in view A, then you need to measure from underneath your arm down to where you would like it to finish. And then on your pattern piece, just draw in the 1 centimetre seam allowance at the underarm and measure your length distance down from there. Add on 3/4 of an inch or about 2 centimetres hem allowance on, and then fold the pattern up here, and just make sure that as you fold it, it's perpendicular to the grain line. So my measurement of 9 inches included my 3/4 inch hem. So obviously depending on your specific preference of where you would want it to come to, then you can customize that, so it might not be 9 inches for you, it might be a different measurement. Now when you come to actually cut the fabric out and lay your pattern pieces on, it's important that you get used to knowing what the right and the wrong side of the fabric is, and sometimes this can be a little bit harder to see in certain jersey fabrics, especially if you're working in low light. So if you're doing it at night time or you've got artificial light, it sometimes can be harder to see. But essentially what you're looking for on a plain fabric like this is you want to look for the little vertical lines, and this is the front, so the back is much smoother on this fabric. The cut edge will also be curling to the right side of the fabric, and then that selvage edge will be curling to the back, so that's another sort of clue that you can look out for there. The curling of fabric, jersey fabric, is very common. A lot of people sort of find that a little bit harder to control, and there's not, you can't eliminate it, like it's not nothing that you sort of done wrong or whatever, it's just the nature of that fabric. I have heard people use spray starch before to help minimize it. I've never personally used that before, but some people do find it useful. You can press it as well with a hot steamy iron, and that can reduce it, can't take it away. But essentially as you then come to construct your garment, if you're finding that your fabric's rolling and it's getting in the way, then you just need to make sure that you use extra pins to stop that. And then also you'll see when I show you how to use the stretch fix for the hems that also really helps with curling as well. Now the fabric we included in the kit is a little bit narrower than what's recommended in the pattern, but we've accounted for that anyway. But for sizes 0 to 20, you should be able to fold those selvage edges in towards each other, so you've got a fold opposite each other, and that's where you can cut out your front and back bodices. For sizes above that, it's likely that you'll have to stack your pieces. Because the fabric is also non-directional, because it's plain, you can also sort of have them like top and tailing each other as well, the bodice pieces, because typically bodice patterns are going to be narrower, at the neckline where the armholes are than at the bottom where the hip line is. So, and that can help you to fit things onto the fabric a bit more economically as well. So it's a really useful thing to be able to work out for future projects till you get the most out of your fabric. And then it might be that you just have to then refold another bit of fabric that's not been cut into yet to cut out your sleeve. So when you do fold the fabric, just check that the little lines are running along the folded edges and that the fabric is nice and smooth and not twisted, and try and avoid letting the fabric hang off the edge of your table as you're cutting it, because that can sort of inadvertently stretch it. You can use a rotary cutter if you have one to help keep the fabric in position as you cut just always make sure cut away from yourself, and a smaller cutter with a smaller diameter blade on it can be good for going round the curves as well. And as the right and wrong sides don't look significantly different, it can really help just to put pins into the reverse as you cut out, just as a visual reminder to help you with what the right and the wrong side is. And then just watch out in the instructions on the bits where it says to cut out on the fold, because they aren't marked with an arrow, which is what you might be used to with other sewing patterns. So just check that you're, for the neckband pieces especially, that you're cutting out on the fold where you need to. When it comes to the notches, I tend to just make little snips in where the notches are. The seam allowance is 1 centimetre though, so make sure that those little snips aren't too big. Then also, in terms of the cutting out, I'm going to show you how to put in a stabilising neck binding piece at the back neckline, which extends into the shoulder seams as well. And you'll need to cut out a bit of fabric for this. So you'll cut out a strip that is 3.5 centimetres wide, and to work out the length of it, you just need to measure your back neckline edge on your paper pattern, and then also your shoulder seam as well. Times that by 2 and just add on a little bit extra, because we're going to trim it down to size anyway, so maybe add like another 5 centimetres on once you've doubled that measurement, and that'll give you a long enough section and as I said, I will explain how to sew that on later. And it just needs to be at a right angle to where the selvage is as well, so that's the sort of direction of how you cut it out. Now for the stretch fix, this magical stuff which makes it so easy to do hems on stretchy garments, you can get it in 2 forms. You can either buy it from the roll, and we sell it in 10 centimetre denominations here at Guthrie and Ganny, or you can buy it in packs as well, where it's just like a specific width and it comes as like a really long strip. So the width that comes in the packet of stretch fix was too wide for what we needed for this project, which is why we've given you a sort of sheet of the stretch fix, and then you can cut your own strips to your own measurement. So you want to be cutting them at 3/4 of an inch. That's your hem allowance. So you can use a quilting ruler to draw that onto the back of the paper. That paper gets peeled off anyway, so it doesn't matter about marking that paper or anything. Or if you don't have a quilting ruler, you can just measure it and cut out your strips. So yeah, you'll end up with lots of strips which will be kind of butting up against each other. Now when it comes to general tips, as I mentioned before, the seam allowance in this project is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch, and you can use a regular sewing machine to completely construct this garment, or you can use your overlocker as well. If you do use the overlocker, I would still recommend using the sewing machine for doing the hems, and then also if you're putting on the neck, the inside neck binding section, that you would use your sewing machine for that as well. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning in reference to the thread, we've got the regular polyester thread here, and what we need to do with our sewing machine is set it up so the stitch that is formed on the sewing machine with that thread is stretchy. You want your seams to be able to stretch with the fabric, and there's a few different options for how you can do that. So it might be that your machine has got a lightning bolt stitch like this, which is super stretchy. This is what it's like in my machine. I tend to lengthen it. On my machine it defaults to 2.5. I usually lengthen it to 3 or 3.5. I'll do a little test in the fabric and see what it looks like. It is quite slow to sew that, so yeah, you might find that's like a little bit annoying. You can also just use a regular zigzag stitch as well, but I would suggest changing the width and length of the zigzag probably from what the default settings come up on your sewing machine. So I would suggest one that is 1.5 by 1.5, and that tends to make a really nice stretchy zigzag stitch. When it comes to finishing off the seam allowances, jersey fabric doesn't tend to fray, so 9 times out of 10, or like 9.9 times out of 10, you're not going to need to finish off the seam allowances like you would on woven fabric with jersey fabric. But you could do if you wanted to just look a little bit, I guess, sort of neater on the inside. I mean, I don't think it looks unneat when you don't finish it, but personal preference there. So you could just use a zigzag stitch to finish off the raw edges if you wanted to. I would suggest using an overcast foot for this. This is what it looks like for my machine, and it's got this little metal bar that the stitches are formed over, which just stops the fabric from tunneling or sort of curling up. So you need to align that metal bar with the edge of your fabric. Now your machine might have special overcast stitches, but also, as I said, a wide zigzag works really well too. Just make sure the stitch is as wide as it will go so that the needle doesn't hit the bar and the fabric might be a little bit wavy after stitching, but it should sit flat with a nice steamy press. Now, if you have an overlocker but you've not got threads that match the fabric exactly, you can use the matching thread from your kit and put it into the left hand needle of the overlocker, because that is the stitches that when any sort of stress or tension or any stitches that might be visible on the outside of the garment will be from that left needle. So that can be in the matching thread, and then you could just get one that generally sort of coordinates for your looper threads in your right hand needle. Now, I would suggest doing some tests on some scraps of jersey just to check that you've got the settings right, and it might be that you need to tweak things a little bit. Usually it's the differential feed that needs changed, so if your fabric is looking a little bit wavy when you place it flat on the table, then you just need to adjust that differential feed, moving it a few clicks to a higher number, and then just try again on a little scrap until it's sitting nice and flat, and that will stop your seams from stretching out as you overlock them. Now, when it comes to top stitching, there's a few areas of top stitching in this project. You've got your hems, and then you've also got your neckline as well, and there's different ways that you can do that. So you could try out a few different methods and see what you prefer the look of the most. So you can use the lightning bolt stitch that I suggested before for sewing the actual seams, and again I would suggest lengthening that to 3 or 3.5. You could use a medium zigzag stitch, so 2.5 width by 2.5 length as well. That also has a really good stretch. Or for a straighter stitch, you could use the triple straight stitch. It's a little bit of a tongue twister to say, and this effectively looks like a straight line, but the way that the machine forms the stitches, it almost kind of goes over each stitch 3 times, and the way that it does that means that it can stretch as well. It does take quite a long time to sew, and it can use a lot of your thread as well, so it just depends what you prefer, the preference of. I would suggest trying them all. If you're new to this, try them all out, see what works best for your machine on the specific fabric you've got as well, because it might also be that you prefer a certain type of stitch with a certain type of fabric. So when you're working with jersey fabrics in the future, do a little test again and see what type of stitch is combining best with the fabric that you've got. The other option is a double needle, and this is where you get 2 lines of straight stitching on the outside of your garment, but on the reverse you effectively get a zigzag stitch. The bobbin thread will zigzag between the 2 top needles. So most machines have this function. There's usually a little attachment that you need to put on so that you can have an additional reel of thread on the top of the machine, and the easiest way to do that without having to get 2 reels of thread is to just use a spare bobbin and put a little bit of thread on another bobbin and use that in the top. So you've got 2 lots of matching thread in the top, and then you've got your regular bobbin in the bottom anyway. So the thread just gets, both top threads just get threaded through your sewing machine like they regularly would, and then you need to thread it through the 2 needles. You can either get width of 2.5mm or 4mm apart. It's just an aesthetic thing, personal preference on what you like the look of the most. In the samples it's a 4mm one that I used, and then just make sure that you've got nice long thread tails when you start and stop the stitch so that you can tie the ends off when you get to the end, because reversing with a double needle tends to not work the best. Make sure that the setting for the machine is just on a regular straight stitch, but it's in the middle of the foot, so that as the needles go down, they're going right in the middle of the foot, they're not off to one side. And then just stitch around your hem or your neckline, whatever you're applying the stitching to. So that gives you a little overview of all the options for top stitching, so you can choose what one you like the best for this project, and also just consider them, bear them in mind for other future projects too. Now, before we actually do any construction, I'm going to suggest that you do some pressing to prepare your pattern pieces first, and this is going to be with using the stretch fix. So you're going to iron those strips of stretch fix that we cut out before onto the bottom of the sleeve hem, unless you're doing one of the versions that has the binding on the sleeve, and then also the bottom hem as well. It's just much easier to iron this on and press the hem up when the pieces are flat and they're not attached to anything else. So I would suggest doing it within, don't do it within the seam allowance. So start your stretch fix 1 centimetre away from the side edges, and then just iron it on along the bottom. You might need to ease it in a little bit because it's a slight curved edge at the bottom hem. And you can just butt different sections of the strips of paper up against each other as well. So you can sort of trim them to size and iron them on. Remember, that paper all gets peeled off later anyway, but don't peel it off yet. And you'll know if it's stuck, because when you go to try and peel it off, you'll see that it's just the paper that's coming away. The actual stretch fix itself will have melted and stuck to the fabric. Then just flip it up again with the paper still on and press it in place too. So that just means that your hem's got a little bit of a crease pre-pressed in it. It makes it much quicker and easier to press that hem later once you've sewn your garment together. Now, when it comes to the shoulder seams, you'll see that the instructions suggest to stabilise the shoulder seams, and this is often recommended so that they don't stretch out. Where they're positioned in the body, and you know, there's gravity and your shoulders are sort of, you know, coming into those seams there. It's just to stop the garment from sort of distorting or coming out of shape. So that's why it's suggested that they're stabilised. And there's a few different ways that you can do that. So the neck binding piece that I'm going to explain to you how to sew in, you have to do it once the neckband's in, so it'll come later. If you're not doing that, then you can put like a little bit of ribbon or some twill tape in the shoulder seams as well to help stabilise it. You want to sew this within the seam allowance, and I usually sew onto the back side of the seam like this. So you don't actually see that in the finished garment or anything, it's just on the inside, stabilising your shoulder. If you are putting that inside neck binding piece on, then once you've sewn your shoulder seams, then you need to trim them to 1/4 of an inch so that everything sort of lines up and matches later. So I'll remind you again later, but just make sure that you've done that step as well. Now, you'll see in the instructions it next tells you to put in your sleeves and do your side seams. I would suggest not doing that. I think it's much easier to put the neckband in next once everything's still flat. So we're gonna go through that first of all. So we just change the order very, very slightly. So before sewing the short ends of the neckband, it's easier to press it in half along the length, and this needs to be wrong sides together. So make sure you've definitely got the right side of the fabric facing out. And then you need to sew the short ends together and then press it in half again so that it is a nice loop ready to be sewn into your garment. If you've sewn this on an overlocker, then you can clip into your seam allowance to the first stitching line, not through it, and then just press the seam allowance to either side just to reduce the bulk there. An optional step if your neckband edges are curling a lot here is to use a wide and long zigzag stitch with the overcast foot just to go over the edges. I probably wouldn't use the overlocker because it adds a little bit extra bulk at this point. And then just make sure you transfer your notches to pins or chalk so that you don't lose them, and it just helps to control those raw edges of the neckband before you come to put it onto your bodice. So your neckband does already have notches for the shoulder, and we have the seam that will go at the centre back, but we need to know where the centre front is to match that to the centre front of your bodice. So just fold the neckband in half of the seam and notch the centre there. Then before attaching your neckband, you just need to find the centre front and centre back of your top. So just fold it in half so the shoulder seams are on top of each other, and then mark the centres with a pin, or you could do a little snip as well. So to pin my neckband on, I like to have the top right side up and lying open. You're going to match up the seam with the centre back and halfway point of the centre front, and then the notches with the shoulders. Now you'll notice the neckband is smaller than the neckline, and that's to help it sit flat. So we just need to distribute the rest of the fabric evenly. So hold on to 2 points that you've pinned and very gently stretch the fabric until the neckband is lying flat, but you're not stretching the neckline. So just grab that midpoint and pin, and repeat that all the way around, adding as many pins as you feel you're comfortable with, that you can control it, and then sew it on using a stretch stitch. So you need to keep the neckband gently pulled flat as you're sewing, but again, don't stretch the neckline. So if you're able to take that section of your sewing machine off so you've got a free arm that's a bit narrower, this can help that. If you're using the overlocker, then you'll need to start sewing at a slight angle to allow the overlocker to start cutting into the 1 centimetre seam allowance. Straighten it out once you get to the correct seam allowance, and I usually start somewhere in the between the centre back seam and the shoulder seam. Just take it really slow, keep double checking that all the raw edges are aligned up, because it's really easy for one to slip back. And then when you come back round, you just need to make sure to cut off that little sort of mountain there and carefully sew past your earlier stitches. So if you're doing the neck band the inside neck binding, then you just need to make sure that the seam allowances of your shoulder seams have been stitched towards the back of your garment. So if they're not, you might have to just unpick that little section and just make sure that they're pointing towards the back, because we're going to be sewing the neckband binding onto them, so they need to be facing the right way. If you're not doing the neckband binding, then now is a good time to put your little Me Made label in, and then you would just do your top stitching all the way around the neckline. If you are doing the binding, don't do any top stitching yet. I would suggest putting the neckband binding in first and then do your top stitching on the front of your neckline afterwards. So to put that neck binding in, first you're going to press that long strip of the binding in half with the wrong sides together, and then turn your top inside out and pin along the shoulder seam and round the back neckline. Just make sure you're not pinning to the body of the top, and you want to line up the raw edge of the binding with the raw edge of the seam allowance, so you're not stretching the binding here. Just put your pins at 90 degrees so you can still see them when we turn it over. Now it is a little bit tricky at the shoulder neckline intersection. Just try and straighten out the junction as you pin the binding on here. Turn the top over and you're going to sew with the back of the top facing up, so stitch right on top of your original stitching but using a straight stitch this time, and you'll need to straighten the fabric out when you get to the neck shoulder junction, but try not to stretch it and just get in as far as you can here. It is a little bit tricky. You can always go back over bits if you didn't get close enough with your first pass of sewing. And then the binding will be too long, so you can just trim that down to size, and then you'll press your binding over the seam allowances to the back of the top. So this is concealing all the raw edges here. You can see it's going to look lovely and neat and tidy, and pin it in place, and it should cover all of those seam allowances, and you can pin your little Me Made label in at the centre back now. So with a straight stitch, go right along the edge of the binding. And this is a little bit tricky. I just use my normal foot with the needle in the middle and tried to follow the folded edge and just stitch on the inside. But if you do have an edge stitch or a blind stitch, that might be able to help if you're struggling. And then turn over and admire your work. You can see that you've got that additional line of top stitching on your shoulder seam, and inside it just looks really lovely and neat and tidy. So once you've done that, then you can do your top stitching of choice along your front neckband. You could also just leave it. You can see in this version here I haven't actually top stitched it at all, so that is an option as well. Just make sure you give it a good press so that it stays nice and flat, and then you're ready to move on to your sleeves. So in jersey stretchy garments, it's very typical for the sleeves to be put in flat, so before you sew the side seams of the bodices. In woven garments, it tends to be more that you would sew the sleeve and the bodice first and then put the sleeve in, but yeah, they go in flat typically when it's stretchy jersey fabric. Now if you're doing view B, which is the one that I'm wearing here, because it's more of a drop shoulder and that sort of sleeve section is a bit straighter, it's really nice and easy to go in. But if you're doing view A, where it's more like the set-in sleeve, because you've got one shape of curve fitting in another shape of curve, then you have to sort of manipulate the fabric a little bit more. So you'll have a notch for your shoulder seam, your front and back notches, and then your underarm as well. So if you pin those landmarks, and then you'll just have to sort of stretch and ease the raw edges together. Again, putting pins in at 90 degrees here can really help. And then you're just going to be sewing it with your stretch stitch. So once you've got your sleeve in, then you're sewing your side seam and your sleeve all in one pass. It's like one continuous seam to sew that all. Just remember, before sewing your side seams, remove the backing paper from all the stretch fix, but just be very careful with the iron from now on, because that is very sticky when it gets hot. Just make sure that you've matched up the underarms as well if you've done the sleeves. Now if you're doing the version that has the armhole bands on it, it's almost like putting the neckband on again. It's in a very similar way. You're creating a loop like you did with the neckband, and pressing it with wrong sides together, matching up your notches so the seam of the armhole band goes up underneath your arm, and then you've got some other notches as landmarks there as well. So it's just a case of pinning them in the same way that you pinned your neckband on, and getting that sewn on, and then top stitching it round as well. And then the final stage is the hems. So again, depending on what version you're making, you'll either have hems to sew on sleeves and the bottom, or it might just be in the bottom. And this is where that stretch fix comes really handy, and that pre-pressing you did as well. So you're just going to be pressing back up to, you know, folding it up towards the wrong side, the back of the fabric, and pressing it in place, and that will activate the stretch fix again and make it melt and stick. So your hem will then just be held in place. You know, you don't need to pin it or anything, and then but you still need to sew it. So once it is ironed on, then just top stitch it in your chosen method, whether that's your lightning bolt or your zigzag stitch or your double needle, and then you are done. You can trim off any loose threads and admire your beautiful work, and hopefully have lots of fun making so many versions of this garment and learning lots of things about sewing with jersey as well. It gets very addictive once you get into it, and you realise actually it's probably not as scary as you thought, and it really can be quite quick and easy to make garments, nice basic garments to match with other handmade items in your handmade wardrobe. So if you do need any help or support or advice at all, then please feel free to reach out. You've got the Sewing Society Facebook group. The link to join that is in the description to this video. You can reach out to the G&G team and I as well. We're always more than happy to help. Call the shop or email us. But I will wish you happy sewing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.